If you wake up tomorrow and you can have any ability, what new ability or skill would you like to be?
The ability would be the ability to learn like a superhuman, if I would, because I feel like the skills evolve in every generation. The ability to learn quickly, I think, is so key in today's generation. And I feel like that's one thing that, at least back home in India, when you go through school, you go through college, you go through all of these different education, no one teaches you how to learn. Everyone teaches you concepts. Everyone teaches you and how to learn, and how that changes from one person to another is super fascinating, but no one teaches you along the way. And I feel like that's such a core skill to have. But yeah, so I would say that.
Yeah. So how to learn itself, right? That's what you're saying.
And if you have that broken down into a science which is repeatable, you're able to stay relevant throughout your career, post your career, in retirement, be a lifetime learner, an actual growth mindset, etc. I feel like that's game changing.
Yeah, and just to share a little bit, one of my biggest learnings around learning has been that learning doesn't just happen intellectually. It happens emotionally, and it also happens physically in our bodies, right? And many times when we think of learning, we only think of either taking in information or like being smart or doing something like with our minds. But there is an emotional part of that, right? So it's even if you read 100 books about a topic, unless you start to do that and go through the highs and lows, only then you're emotionally you will be able to learn it. It's so easy to say that I know about something, but to actually know that requires an emotional component, and I think which is totally missing from our like formal education methods, right? And that has been my biggest learning, to involve myself emotionally rather than continuously thinking of like more intellectual knowledge, right? Which doesn't help beyond a certain point.
That's super interesting, actually. I didn't think of it like that. Maybe after this, we can spend some more time on this. I'd love to learn more about your views on this. But I'm curious, if you don't mind, could you break that down into what is your approach or your framework to aid learning?
One is like practice in the situation that you will be required to practice the skill, right? Not just practice in a mock setting, or like you're reading something about leadership or doing a case study or something like that, because that doesn't help beyond a certain level. So practice in the real level, and then also integrating it with a level of reflection, especially when things don't go well. So normally we do say that fail fast or get back up very quickly, but what we don't see is how to integrate those emotions. So if we fail, how do you integrate with the feeling of guilt? Right? You can say learn, but if you're feeling guilty, the guilt will not allow you to actually make good use of the learning. Or if you're feeling anger or frustration or temper, then you can simply learn to just avoid it or suppress it. But somewhere you will also have to learn to listen to it, to address it, because if you're not in an emotional calm state, any learning or any activity, your output will be lesser than optimal. So there are particular emotions which are like good for leadership, and the stress is not one of them. I think it's a
across the board
big like paradox that most leaders are stressed, while that is not the most effective way to lead or to learn. And then and we are not even talking about the emotional element, right? Any leader would get more effective if we simply work on the emotional skills. And I'm not just talking about emotional intelligence, because I think the way emotional intelligence is presented today is still very intellectual. We are not really being okay with our tears, with our guilt, with our frustrations, and we're just trying to understand it like by reading a book or by reading an article. So that has been my biggest like learning, and how I also try to integrate when these difficult emotions come up.
That's so beautiful. And and it's so interesting because like obviously I have been in therapy for a long while, so I work with my therapist on a lot of these things, and it's just like you notice sometimes, obviously you don't notice it at that point of time, but then working with a professional helps you identify what are those blocks, and you're saying this emotional blocks which you don't even realize that were there, or you don't realize that, and there is so much of guilt for sure, and there's so much of there's so many of these emotions which I think it's so true.